The phone rings at 7:42 a.m., sharp, slicing through the silence of my little kitchen. I pick it up, half expecting a friendly voice, maybe a reminder about a doctor's appointment. Instead, the voice is cold, flat, official. Mrs. Carter? This is First National Bank. We're calling to confirm unusual activity on your account. My fork slips from my hand, clattering against the porcelain plate. Unusual activity? I live on a fixed pension. My spending is as predictable as sunrise utilities, groceries, medication, nothing more. I don't understand, I stammer. The man clears his throat, papers shuffling in the background. There have been multiple withdrawals over the last 3 days. Casinos. Large sums. Tens of thousands. The word casinos detonates in my head. For a moment, I can't hear him over the roar in my ears, like a train passing too close. My knees buckle. I have to grip the edge of the counter. That's impossible, I cry. I don't gamble. That's my pension. My life savings. The line goes silent except for the steady hum. Then he says, too calmly, Mrs. Carter, I suggest you visit the branch immediately. We have the documents here, signed in your name. Signed. In my name. The words land heavier than bricks. The bank's marble floor feels colder than winter ice as I step inside. Every sound echoes heels tapping, the distant click of printers, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. I clutch my worn leather purse, the same one I've carried for 20 years, as though it could still protect me. Behind the glass, a young clerk calls my name. Mrs. Carter, please sit. He slides a stack of papers across the desk. His smile is tight, professional, the kind people wear when they don't want to get involved. I reach for the first page. My fingers tremble, the paper rasping like sandpaper. Lines of numbers, all in neat columns, spill across the page. 5,000, 8,000, 12,000, 12,000, each marked Golden Palace Casino. My chest constricts. I whisper, barely audible, this is my retirement. The clerk shifts in his chair. And here, he adds carefully, turning another page, is the authorization form. Signed by you. I lean closer. My eyes, though clouded with age, sharpen on the ink. The signature curls across the line in confident strokes. My name. Helen Carter. But it isn't mine. I would know the tilt of my own letters, the hesitant hook of my H. This one is bold, careless, like someone daring me to notice. No. I breathe. Louder, my voice cracking. No. This is a forgery. And then, my blood freezes. The date, the handwriting, the witness line. I recognize the witness's scrawl instantly. I've seen it on birthday cards, on little notes left on the fridge. Emily, my daughter-in-law. The room tilts. My hands grip the edge of the desk, nails biting into wood. The clerk asks something. His lips move, but I can't hear. All I see is that name, mocking me from the page. Emily. The woman I welcomed into my family. The woman I cooked Sunday dinners for. The woman I once trusted with my keys when I went into the hospital. I whisper into the sterile air. To no one and everyone at once. Emily, my daughter-in-law. Why would it be you? Tears prick my eyes, but rage pushes harder. How many nights had I skipped little indulgences? A new coat? A dinner out? So the savings account could grow steady, untouched. How many mornings had I told myself, this is for the future, for security, for dignity. And now, a casino floor has swallowed it whole. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead, buzzing, relentless. The paper shakes in my grip. I can almost hear the cackling slot machines, the hollow applause of strangers clapping as my future is siphoned coin by coin. It hits me in the gut. This wasn't just theft. It was betrayal, dressed in family's face. I close my eyes. the signature burning behind my lids. It felt, I whisper, as if someone had drained the blood from my body and still smiled at me. The brown leather wallet lies on my kitchen table, cracked at the edges, softened by years of use. It once belonged to my late husband, George. He carried it in his breast pocket every morning before heading to the construction site. When he died, I slipped it into my own bag, telling myself I would guard it and everything we had built for both of us. Now, as I run my thumb across its worn stitching, the wallet becomes a doorway. It pulls me back, through 2 decades of long nights, aching feet, and sacrifices I thought were seeds of love. For 20 years I worked the night shift as a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. Midnight to dawn. The corridors smelled of disinfectant and bitter coffee. I pushed medicine carts down linoleum floors while the rest of the city slept. Every 2 weeks, my paycheck came, $1,240 after taxes. I would sit at the kitchen table, spread the bills like battle plans. December's electric bill, $85. January's gas, $11.12. Groceries, I stretched $60 by buying day-old bread and dented cans of soup. I saved what little remained, tucking it into that leather wallet before walking it to the bank. I told myself, one day, this will be my safety, my dignity. When Daniel married Emily, I believed my sacrifices had finally bloomed into something sweet. They stood together under the oak tree in the backyard, her veil brushing against his shoulder. My heart swelled. A mother's dream fulfilled. That autumn, they wanted to buy their first house. The mortgage hung heavy over them, and without a second thought, I sold the tiny patch of farmland George had left me. $50,000. The cashier's check shook in my hand as I passed it across the table. Emily smiled, her lips pressed tight. You're so generous, Helen. We'll never forget this. At the time, I thought her voice carried gratitude. Looking back, I wonder if there was something else. Relief, calculation. The pattern continued. When their first child was born, complications landed Emily in the hospital for a week. The bill arrived like a slap. $20,000. I remember the exact moment. Rain lashed against the windows, my hands stiff from the cold. I pulled out my wallet, slipped the check inside the envelope, and whispered, only this once. For family. But, only once, turned into again. And again. A car repair, $3,200. A business venture, $12,000. Christmas gifts for the children, $800 that I couldn't really afford. Every time, I opened the same wallet. My thumb stroked its leather as though touching George's hand, begging him to forgive me for letting go of our security. There were signs, I realize now. Small cracks in the mask. Once, I handed Emily an envelope for Daniel's graduate course. She took it, smiled quickly, then slipped it into her purse without even looking at me. Not a thank you, not a hug. Just a faint tightening around her mouth, as if gratitude were an inconvenience. Another time, I offered to babysit so they could have a night out. Emily looked at me strangely and said, almost sharply, we'll let you know when we need you, Helen. Her tone stung, but I told myself she was tired. I pushed it aside, like I always did. I blamed myself instead. Helen, why are you so naive? Why do you think love will multiply just because you keep giving? I thought of my patients, how I tended their wounds, how care was measured in what you gave, not what you kept. I treated my family the same way, as if love could be transfused like blood. But slowly, I noticed a shift. My hand no longer trembled when pulling out cash. It became routine, muscle memory, like flipping a light switch. Rent due? Here. ECB's nose failing? Take this. Christmas short? I'll cover it. Each time, the wallet grew thinner. Each time, I promised myself it would be the last. And each time, I lied. I remember one winter evening especially. The heater had broken in my little house. I sat wrapped in George's old coat, fingers numb, and thought about calling the repairman. But when Daniel rang, asking for another $2,000 to fix their roof, I didn't hesitate. I reached for the wallet. The leather was cold, almost stiff, but my hand moved automatically. That night, I shivered myself to sleep, whispering, "At least they're warm." The wallet had become both a shield and a weapon against me. A shield, because it carried the remnants of George's presence, his memory. A weapon, because every time I opened it, I cut away another piece of myself. Looking back, I see the foreshadowing in every scene. The clipped thank yous, the quick dismissals, the faint contempt in Emily's eyes when she saw me count out wrinkled bills. At the time, I told myself, this is family. This is love. But now, staring at the empty account, I wonder if I was simply convenient. The leather wallet still lies before me, empty, flimsy, but heavier than ever. I no longer know when the shift occurred, when my hand grew more accustomed to giving than to holding. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, gray and damp. I sat at the kitchen table with the bank documents spread before me. The paper edges had already curled from my damp fingers. My tea had gone cold, untouched. Outside, rain tapped the window, each drop steady as a metronome marking the countdown of my choices. I stared at the numbers, the withdrawals, the forged signature. My chest felt hollow, as if my ribs were just scaffolding for emptiness. And yet my cheeks were wet. Tears slid down silently, but my heart had grown too cold to keep pace with them. The silence of the house pressed in. For decades, this had been my refuge, the place where George's laughter once lived, where Daniel's footsteps once thundered down the hallway. But in that moment, it felt like a coffin, sealed with betrayal. Inside me, a voice rose, quiet, insistent, impossible to ignore. If I keep silent, will I lose this house too? T.S. If I keep silent, am I agreeing to disappear? If I keep silent, will there be anything left of Helen Carter? Each question landed like a hammer against my ribs. Short, sharp, unavoidable. I saw the two futures stretched before me. In one, I kept paying, kept excusing, kept pulling money from a wallet that grew thinner every month. In that version of life, I shrank, smaller and smaller, until even my reflection no longer recognized me. In the other, I stood up. I risked the storm, the confrontation, the loneliness. That version terrified me, but at least I was still alive inside it. I reached for the laptop. My hand trembled, the cursor blinking on the online banking page like a taunt. There it was, the automatic transfer. Scheduled monthly. Silent, obedient, draining me drop by drop. My throat tightened. My index finger hovered over the cancel button. I whispered to the empty room, "If I press this, everything changes." The cursor pulsed. My breath caught. My finger dropped. Click. The word on the screen shifted. Transfer cancel. For a second, nothing happened. Then a warmth rushed into me, spreading from my chest outward. My lips twitched, and before I could stop it, I was smiling. Not a polite smile, not one for anyone else. Just a raw, trembling smile that felt like air after drowning. But I wasn't finished. I walked to the safe in my bedroom. The squat metal box George and I bought after his first heart attack, back when we thought preparing for the future meant fireproof locks, not family betrayals. The key was cold against my palm. I turned it slowly, the hinges squealing like an old wound reopening. Inside, envelopes lay stacked, some empty, some with the ghosts of money long gone. At the very top sat George's watch, still ticking faintly, stubborn as his spirit. I closed the door firmly. My hand lingered on the cool steel. Then, with a sharp twist, I turned the lock. The click echoed louder than it should have, like a gunshot in a church. I exhaled, long and steady. My knees nearly buckled, not from weakness this time, but from release. The cost of doing nothing replayed in my mind. If I hadn't pressed cancel, if I hadn't locked that safe, what then? I would have lost the roof above my head. I would have lost the last fragments of George's legacy. I would have lost the very core of myself, the part that still believed I was worthy of safety, of dignity. Doing nothing meant death by inches. Doing something meant risk, confrontation, maybe even war. And yet, for the first time, I felt ready. The air in the house seemed lighter. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the glass streaked but clear. I touched the window pane, cool beneath my fingertips, and whispered, "Enough." I could hear my own voice, steady now, grounded. The words weren't just sound, they were an oath. That afternoon, in the small kitchen of my modest house, I crossed an invisible line. The living room had never felt this small. The same beige walls, the same floral curtains, the same clock ticking on the mantel. Yet the air was thick, heavy, as if the house itself knew it was about to witness a battle. On the coffee table sat a neat folder. Its edges were too crisp, too deliberate, like a weapon laid out in plain sight. Beside it, my teacup trembled in its saucer. I hadn't touched the tea, I couldn't. The steam had already faded, leaving only the faint smell of bergamot in the stale air. The front door creaked, and then they entered. Daniel, my son, walked in first, shoulders stiff, eyes down. Behind him, Emily strode with her chin high, lips curved into something that was neither smile nor sneer, but a blade disguised as silk. She set her purse down with a thud, folded her arms, and looked at me as if the house, the air, the very walls belonged to her. "Mama," she said sweetly, though her voice dripped with poison, "money is meant to be shared in a family. You're old. What do you really need so much for?" Her words sliced cleaner than any scalpel. I drew a long breath, forcing my voice to remain calm. "No, Emily. That money is sweat and bone. 40 years of nights in a hospital ward. No one has the right to throw it away in a casino." Emily's smile stiffened. She tilted her head, as though I were a stubborn child refusing medicine. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom," he said softly, "don't make this bigger than it has to be." My own son. The boy whose scraped knees I bandaged, whose fevered forehead I cooled with my hands. Now he stood beside the woman who had gutted my future, telling me not to make it big. Something inside me twisted. But I sat straighter. "I didn't make it big, Daniel. Emily did when she forged my name." His eyes flicked to hers, then away. He said nothing. Emily slid the folder across the table. The papers whispered against the wood, too loud in the quiet room. "Here," she said. "This will fix everything. Just sign it, Helen. It's another authorization form. Then the bank will release the funds, and we can all move on." Her manicured finger tapped the signature line. "One little signature, and you'll never have to worry again." I stared at the page. My name was already there in a dozen false copies, bold and careless. Now she wanted me to write it myself, to make the theft legitimate. My pulse hammered in my ears. "No," I said, the word sharp as glass. Emily's smile froze. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, louder this time. "This ends now." Her voice sharpened, the sweetness stripped away. "You think you can stop us? Daniel is your son. Do you want him to lose his house? Do you want your grandchildren to suffer? Is that the legacy you want to leave?" Her arguments hit like stones. Family, children, legacy, words I had lived by, words I had sacrificed for. But beneath them, I heard the rot. Not concern, not love, just manipulation wearing the mask of duty. I placed my trembling hands on the folder, opened it, and lifted the paper. The room held its breath. Daniel took a step forward. "Mom, please, just sign. Don't ruin everything." I looked at him, at the man who was once the boy who begged me for one more bedtime story, one more glass of milk. My voice cracked but stayed steady. I ruined nothing, Daniel. I built everything, and I will not let it be destroyed by greed. I raised the paper high. Emily's eyes widened. She lunged forward, and I tore it down the middle. The sound ripped through the room. Rip. A clean, final note, louder than the clock, louder than my own heartbeat. Emily froze, her hand hanging in the air. Daniel flinched, as if the sound had cut him too. I stood, the halves of the paper falling like dead leaves to the floor. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Emily hissed, "You'll regret this." Her heels clicked hard against the floor as she grabbed her purse. Daniel followed, his eyes avoiding mine, his shoulders hunched in shame, or maybe guilt. The front door slammed. Silence rushed back in. I sank into the armchair, my hands still trembling, my chest heaving. But inside me, something burned bright, a flame I hadn't felt in years. The summons arrived on a Thursday 11:13 a.m., stamped in indigo ink, the envelope stiff as a blade. I signed for it at the door, with a pen that scraped like a needle across skin. The courier's cologne lingered after he left, sharp and citrusy, out of place in my plain hallway. I stood there a full minute, envelope in hand, feeling the tremor ripple from my fingers up my forearm. I didn't open it at once. I set the kettle to boil, then turned it off before it sang. The house felt crowded with paper. Utility bills on the counter, bank letters on the table, the torn halves of that forged authorization still tucked inside the living room drawer like a secret rebellion. Finally, I slid a butter knife along the envelope's edge. Superior Court of River County, the heading declared. Below it, my name, Helen Carter, and then the words that hollowed me out in a single line. Complaint. Conversion. Promissory estoppel, followed by the name Emily Carter, and a law firm I did not recognize. My chest seized. They're suing me for not giving them my money. The absurdity nearly made me laugh. Instead, I sat down, the chair creaking as if it, too, objected to the weight of all this. By noon, the news had already spread like warm jam across toast. Mrs. Rivera from 2 doors down paused too long when she walked her dog past my front steps. 2 teenagers on bikes slowed, whispered, rode on. At the small market on Melrose and 8th, the butcher asked if I wanted my usual cut, then didn't wait for my answer. He wrapped the meat, eyes skittering away from mine as if misfortune were catching. The summons paper lay on the table, heavy and white and merciless. I traced the date, September 4:10 a.m., with a fingertip that felt suddenly like someone else's. A trial date would follow, the document warned. Dean H. Appear or default. The kettle, forgotten, clicked softly as it cooled. That afternoon, the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then pressed play. "Mrs. Carter," a smooth male voice said. "This is Michael Trent, counsel for Emily Carter. We believe there were prior oral promises to provide continued financial support, which you have now rescinded in bad faith. We intend to resolve this amicably. If you sign a new authorization and remit the overdue amount within 10 days, we will recommend dismissal. Otherwise," a pause, just long enough to let fear bloom. "Otherwise, we will proceed." I replayed the message twice more, listening to the way his tone caressed the word Ev bade faith like it tasted good. That night, I couldn't sleep. I fetched the composition notebook I kept for shopping lists and, on the first blank page, wrote the date and time. Sept 4, 9027 p.m. Voicemail from Michael Trent. Threat implied. 10-day demand. AEI. I underlined 10-day demand until the paper thinned. Then I went to the front door and checked the camera I'd installed after George's second heart attack. A square of black glass, quietly watching. I pulled up the feed on my old phone. Grainy footage of the courier at 11:13 a.m. The envelope exchanging hands. I saved the clip to a folder called Legal. The act of naming the folder steadied me, like tying a knot tight enough to hold. 2 days later, they delivered their first story to the world, or at least to our block. It arrived in fragments, carried on the soft wings of neighborly concern. "I heard," Mrs. Rivera said, leaning over her fence, "that you promised to help them with the new mortgage until the end of the year. That you insisted, even. Is that true?" Insisted. I smiled thinly. "No." At the grocery store, the cashier, a girl with pink hair I'd watched grow up from pigtails to eyeliner, said, "My mom says Emily's been taking care of you. That you're not well. She says it's I complicated." Not well. Complicated. Words that turn light into fog. In the afternoon, a letter slid under my door. No return address. Families should share. You raised your son to be responsible. Don't make him choose between his mother and his wife. Do the right thing. I folded the letter once, then again, and put it in the notebook. Sept 6, 18 p.m. Anonymous letter. Moral pressure. Do the right thing. That evening, I walked to the mailboxes and found Mrs. Thurdeval Robinson sitting on the concrete planters, her cane resting against her knee, her hair a careful halo of white. She'd lost her husband last spring and had begun wearing lipstick again in summer, as if color itself could argue with grief. "Is it true?" she asked, blunt but not unkind. "Parts of it are true," I said. "They're suing me. The rest is decoration." She nodded once, as if that matched the shape of her suspicion. Then she reached into her tote bag and produced a small spiral-bound notebook. "You'll need one of these," she said. "Write everything down. Times, dates, what they say, what you say. People lie. Paper remembers." Her eyes were clear as rain. I almost cried right there beside the mailboxes, but instead I took the notebook as if she had just handed me a small, sturdy weapon. "Thank you," I said, the two words feeling insufficient but honest. 3 days later, Linda called. We had trained together at St. Tapia, at St. Remeter's. Mary's 2 lifetimes ago, she moved to Phoenix after her husband's stroke, and the miles thinned our conversations to holiday postcards and the occasional call. Somehow, she heard. "I'm driving up," she said. "Don't argue." "Linda," I said, "don't argue. I'll bring coffee and an extra backbone in my purse. We'll share." I laughed for the first time in a week, the sound rusted but real. She arrived on Sept 10, 8:05 a.m., thumping her travel mug onto my table like a gavel. "Show me what you've got." I showed her the summons, the voicemail transcription, the anonymous letter. We made piles. We labeled them. Summons. Timeline. Witnesses. Documents Dodges. "Good," she said. "You're thinking like a nurse again. Assessment first, then plan." "Plan?" I asked, suddenly small. She pointed to the notebook. "You're going to build a spine out of paper." By the end of the week, the opposing side had built their first tower of lies. Emily's lawyer sent clarifying documents, by email, screenshots of alleged text messages, green bubbles that looked enough like mine to unsettle, but not enough to fool me, where I supposedly promised to cover their mortgage until spring. The dates made my throat go dry. May 14, 7002 p.m. June 1, June, 11 a.m. Back when I was still paying out of habit. Back when saying yes felt safer than setting boundaries. I printed them and laid them next to my phone records. On May 14, at 7002 p.m., I had been on shift at the hospital part-time covering a friend's hours, documenting vitals. My notes in the electronic chart system, if I could get them, would show I was on the ward, not texting from my couch. On June 1, at 10:11 a.m., I was at the clinic for my arthritis injection. The appointment card still sat in my wallet, its corner worn soft from my thumb. Neo-Thej. Dates, times, scraps of paper that breathe. I wrote, alleged texts fabricated. Cross-check with EHR logs and clinic appointment. I called the clinic. Can I get proof I was there on June 1? I asked the receptionist, who sounded 12 but was likely 22. Time-stamped, if possible. Source, she said. I'll email the verification. Small kindnesses, she called me. Ms. PC. Helen, at the end. The pushback deepened. On Sept 12, 2:44 p.m., a woman I didn't know, later introduced as a family friend in Emily's filings, left a voicemail describing how she'd seen me hand Emily an envelope and tell her, use it however you need, sweetheart. Casino or bills, it's all fun money now. I recognized her voice from a barbecue once. She'd worn a fuchsia sundress and the laugh like broken glass. I paused the message, rewound, pressed play again. The script sounded rehearsed. Casino or bills, it's all fun money now. The line didn't fit my mouth. That night, I wrote, witness claim, Cassandra. Contradiction. I have never used phrase, fun money. Check texts, emails for language baseline. The clinical phrasing soothed me. It turned chaos into tasks. On my front camera, I cataloged Sept 9/6:32 p.m. Emily at my door, knocking hard, leaving when I didn't answer, her face turned half away from the lens. Sept 12/7:15 a.m. Daniel alone, hands in pockets, staring at the house like it might speak to him if he waited patiently enough. I saved both clips. When the phone rang after dark and no one spoke, I wrote, no voice calls X3. When someone muttered, selfish old bat, and hung up quickly, I wrote the words in a careful hand as if copying a prescription. Selfish old bat. I did not cry. I drank water, the glass cold and sweating against my palm, and then I turned the page. There were moments of breath, because life insists on them. On Sunday morning, Mrs. Robinson knocked at 9:00 sharp, carrying blueberry muffins. Too sweet, she warned, but sugar does blunt fear. We ate them warm on the porch. She told me about the way her husband had organized the tax files, by year, then by amount, then by color, an arcane logic that still made her furious and fond all at once. We laughed until the neighbor's cat yawned at us like a sleepy judge. Linda stayed 3 nights. We went through old photo albums because she said it mattered to remember who I was before all this. In one picture, George had his arm around me, flour dust on his shirt from a pie crust that refused to behave. In another, Daniel, cow-licked and gap-toothed, grinned up at me with a popsicle-stained mouth. Keep those near, Linda said, sliding the photos into clear sleeves. Not for court, for you. When she left, she tucked a note under the sugar bowl. You are not alone. Call me after each step, even if the step is just, I breathed today. Turnus? I taped the note inside the cupboard door where I kept the tea. Every time I reached for a tea bag, I saw it. The next escalation arrived, wrapped in politeness. Michael Trent called again, this time with warmth warmed over. Mrs. Carter, I think we can avoid the ugliness of a trial, he drawled. If you acknowledge the prior arrangement and sign a narrow power of attorney strictly for mortgage and living expenses, we'll settle. We all want what's best for the family. I wrote down his words as he spoke, each syllable neat. Then I said, what's best for the family is honesty. I won't sign. He exhaled into the phone, a sound like a door closing. Then I'll see you in court. After I hung up, fear bagged my lungs for a minute. I sat on the edge of my bed counting heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, until the tightness loosened. Then I stood and turned on the bedside lamp, its yellow glow cutting the room into gentler shapes. I pulled out the legal folder, reviewed the timeline, and added a new line. Sept 14:35 p.m. MT settlement call. Refused. I pressed the pen into the paper so hard the page dented. Some nights, I could feel their story creeping under the door. sticky as fog. She's confused. She promised. She promised. She's punishing the children. The story slid into conversations I wasn't part of, pressed against windows I'd shut. It was everywhere and nowhere. And yet, my camera feed sat quiet, my notebook grew thick, and the folder called Legal filled with clipped proofs and dates that breathed like small, sturdy engines. On Sept 16, I met with Mr. Frage. Harris, the lawyer Linda had found, through a nurse at her church. He was younger than I expected, with a face that hadn't yet learned how to look bored. His tie was crooked. It made me trust him more. "Tell me everything, Mrs. Carter," he said, and when I tried to, my voice wobbled, then steadied, then came out like something that had been waiting years to be heard. He listened without interrupting, writing in a tidy hand. When I finished, he tapped the folder. "We can challenge the fabricated texts. We'll subpoena the clinic for June 1, the hospital for May 14. We'll request metadata from your phone carrier." He glanced up. "And we'll ask the bank for the original authorization with the signature they claim is yours. A forensic examiner will compare it. If it's forged, we'll prove it." His certainty wasn't a cure, but it was a coat against the wind. "That said," he continued, "this will get uglier before it gets cleaner. Opposing counsel will try to paint you as forgetful, coercive, unstable. Be ready." "I am," I said, and discovered that part of me already was. He slid a card across the desk. "From now on, if they call, you tell them to go through me." When I left his office, the late light washed the strip mall gold. I sat in my car a long time, holding his card like a talisman, the embossing catching the sun. The worst moment came quietly. Sept went 18, 7006 p.m. I was washing dishes when I saw Daniel's shadow through the frosted glass of my front door. I dried my hands, opened it, and there he was, older than yesterday it seemed, his face a map of roads he didn't want to walk. "Mom," he said, and the word tugged at some tender, unarmored place in me. "Come in," I said. He didn't move. "I can't stay. I wanted to say this isn't what I wanted." "What is it you want, Daniel?" I asked, not unkindly. He looked down at his shoes. "For everyone to stop being angry." I waited. "And for you to sign," he added, softer. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, I made my voice as gentle as I knew how. "I won't sign. Not because I'm angry. Because I'm awake." A muscle jumped in his cheek. For a heartbeat, I thought he might cry. Then he swallowed, nodded once, and left without looking back. I watched his figure shrink down the path until it blurred into dusk. In the sink, the water had gone cold. I plunged my hands in anyway, let the chill sting until it turned into something like clarity. I dried the plates, turned off the kitchen light, and sat at the table with my notebook. Sept 18, 7006 p.m. Daniel at door. "Wants no anger. Puss signature." Said no. Because, awake. The last two words made me smile, only a little, but it counted. The neighborhood would tell itself whatever story it needed. Emily's lawyer would file motions with confident verbs. Anonymous notes might multiply like winter crows. But my pages multiplied too. And in the ledger between fear and fact, the numbers began, at last, to favor me. That night, I set the camera alerts to high sensitivity. I moved the legal folder to the front of the file cabinet and placed George's watch atop it like a blessing. Then I sat in the dark living room and listened to the house breathe, the soft settling of wood, the tick of the mantel clock, the refrigerator's distant hum. Ordinary sounds, yes, but they threaded me back to myself. "Els," I whispered into the dim, "at my age, am I really going to court against my own daughter-in-law?" The clock answered with a steady tick, and then I felt it. Fear, yes, coiled low and electric. But beside it, something hotter, cleaner, taking shape the way a flame does when it finds air. I was afraid, but the fear turned to fire. I had to stand up. And as the room thinned with the coming dawn, a question rose and settled on my tongue, cool and precise as a judge's gavel. If they could forge my name to steal my future once, how far would they go when the truth finally faces them under oath? I hadn't planned to go to the bank that morning. My only intention was to ask a question about my pension transfer, something simple, something routine. Yet fate has a cruel sense of timing. The lobby smelled of stale carpet cleaner and coffee left too long on a hot plate. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the air conditioning blew cold against my skin. I clutched my brown leather wallet like a talisman, stepping toward the counter. "Mrs. Carter," the young teller greeted, polite, professional. "If you'd like to wait, our branch manager will bring you the documents you asked for." I hadn't asked for any documents. But before I could correct him, he disappeared into the back office. Minutes later, he returned, carrying a thin folder. He slid it across the counter with a neutral smile. "Here you go. Just a copy for your records." The folder was warm from his hand, yet the paper inside felt icy against my fingertips. I opened it. And there it was. My name, bold across the bottom line. Helen Carter. The letters curved too neatly, the H too confident, the loops too careless. My hand shook as I traced the ink, even though I knew, those strokes weren't mine. A forged authorization form, the one that had nearly bled me dry. For a moment, the lobby blurred. My ears filled with the pounding of my own pulse. The second hand on the wall clock seemed to tick louder and louder. Each beat a hammer inside my chest. I whispered to myself, too softly for anyone else to hear, "No, that isn't mine. That is not my hand." I wanted to drop the paper, to fling it away as if it were burning me. Instead, I held on tighter, the edge biting into my palm. They forged my name. S.E. They wanted me erased. Too. They thought no one would notice. 10 each trait. But I see it now. Each thought struck fast, sharp, like the notes of a piano played too hard. My knees trembled, but my eyes sharpened. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the ground beneath me steady. This wasn't just theft. This was proof. The teller glanced at me, perhaps sensing the storm in my silence. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Carter?" I forced my lips into a line. "Yes," I lied. "Everything is fine." But inside, a fire caught. I slid the paper back into the folder, closed it carefully as if it were fragile, and tucked it under my arm. My heart still pounded, but my breath slowed. I walked out of the bank with the steady steps of someone who had found a weapon. Outside, the autumn air hit my face, cool and bracing. I stood on the sidewalk, folder pressed to my chest, and let the realization sink in. This could ruin me, or this could save me. Back home, I spread the document across the kitchen table. The overhead light glared down, highlighting every false curve of the signature. I whispered, "George, if you were here, you'd see it too." They thought they could steal our years with a pen. My hand reached for the phone. The digits blurred for a moment as I dialed, but I pressed on. "Mr. Harris," I said when the line connected. My voice trembled, but the words were steady. "I need your help. I've found something big." He asked me to describe it. I did, every detail. The strokes of the forged letters, the date, the witness line that bore Emily's handwriting like a mocking flourish. There was a pause on his end, then a firmness in his voice I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Carter, keep that safe. Don't let it out of your sight. That's not just paper. That's your defense." That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the document still in front of me. The house was silent, except for the faint groan of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. I could almost hear Emily's voice, sweet and poisonous. "One little signature, and you'll never have to worry again." But now I had her real signature, twisted into a weapon against me. I pressed my palm flat on the paper, feeling the faint indentation of the forged ink. My hand was steady. My breath was calm. They think this is their victory, I whispered. But it's my salvation. The folder on my dining table had grown thick. What began as a single sheet, the forged authorization, was now a fortress of paper. Bank statements, phone records, letters slipped under my door, a DVD from my front camera. Every page felt heavier than it should, as though each carried the weight of my past mistakes and the hope that I might finally set them right. Mr. Harris sat across from me, his tie crooked, his pen scratching notes in a tidy hand. He flipped open a binder and pointed to a section I had highlighted. "These transfers," he said, tapping the lines with the blunt end of his pen, "they're consistent. Automatic. Predictable. That's why her story doesn't add up. She claims you promised more. But promises don't create patterns like this. Only compulsion does." He looked up, his eyes steady, calm. "Mrs. Carter, the truth will protect you, if you're strong enough to say it out loud." I nodded, clutching my notebook. My handwriting wavered across the page, but the words were firm. "Truth is my shield. Voice is my weapon." The next morning, I spread the documents across my living room floor, stacks arranged in careful piles. Bank slips on the left, medical receipts in the middle, the forged authorization at the center, like a rotten apple in the barrel. I wrote labels on sticky notes and pressed them down. Evidence A. Evidence B. Timeline 1. Timeline 2. It felt less like a house now and more like an armory. Every folder, every stapled packet was a blade, polished and ready. I whispered to myself, "I am not helpless. These pages are my sword." But paper alone could not carry me through the courtroom. My voice had to be ready too. That evening, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, the small lamp throwing a pool of yellow light across my reflection. My mouth was dry. My hands fidgeted with the hem of my cardigan. I forced myself to look into my own eyes. The first attempt came out cracked. I did not give my consent. I cleared my throat, tried again. I did not give my consent. Stronger this time, though my heart still raced. Then I whispered the line. "Mr. Harris told me to repeat until it became muscle memory. I am not ashamed of keeping my own money." At first, my voice faltered, the words collapsing halfway. But I said them again and again. By the 10th repetition, I was almost shouting at the woman in the mirror. An old woman, yes, but one whose shoulders no longer sagged. I hit record on my phone, played it back. The first version sounded timid, like a child caught lying. The last version? Firm, resonant, undeniable. I smiled at myself. A small, fierce smile. Support arrived in unexpected ways. Mrs. Robinson knocked one evening with a tin of blueberry muffins. "They're too sweet," she said, settling herself in my armchair. "But sugar makes courage stick." She stayed until nearly midnight, telling stories of her late husband's stubbornness, reminding me that surviving loss was its own kind of battle training. 2 days later, Linda returned with her bottomless thermos of coffee and her unstoppable laugh. She spread the papers across the table with me, checking dates, underlining inconsistencies, reading aloud in her sharp nurse's cadence. "You see this?" she said, jabbing her finger at a supposed text message from me. "Wrong punctuation. You never use exclamation marks. Ever. That's your fingerprint right there." We laughed until tears pricked my eyes. Not because it was funny, but because it felt good to be seen so precisely. At midnight, when exhaustion dragged at me, she stayed, laying a blanket across my shoulders. "We're not letting you face this alone," she said. The nights were long. Sometimes, I woke at 3 a.m., the shadows of the room pressing in. I would shuffle into the kitchen, turn on the light, and spread the documents again, touching each one like beads on a rosary. Each page whispered, "You are not crazy. You are not alone." This happened. This is real. I thought of all the times I had stayed silent, when Emily brushed off my questions, when Daniel avoided my eyes, when neighbors whispered half-truths in the grocery store. Silence had been easier, softer, but silence had cost me too much. Now my silence was gone. My voice would rise, even if it shook. The week before the court date, Mr. C. Moortop, Harris came again. He laid out the process in calm, measured words. "They'll try to rattle you," he said. "They'll say you forgot, that you're confused, that you wanted this arrangement. Don't let them plant doubt. Answer simply, clearly. Don't argue. Just state the truth." I asked, "What if they call me selfish?" "Then you say," he replied without missing a beat, "that protecting your own pension is not selfish. It's survival." I inhaled deeply, nodded, and wrote it down. On the final night of preparation, the house was full. Linda dozed on the sofa, arms crossed over her chest, while Mrs. Ted Robinson sat at the kitchen table knitting something small and blue. Mr. Harris reviewed one last timeline, his tie loosened, his pen tapping the paper. I stood before the mirror again. This time, my voice didn't tremble. I did not give my consent. I am not ashamed of keeping my own money. My dignity is not up for debate. The words filled the room, bounced against the walls, and came back to me stronger than I sent them. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel: solidarity. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not the air conditioning kind of cold, but the kind that seeps into your bones when marble floors echo too loudly and fluorescent lights bleach every face into pale masks. Wooden benches lined the back, already filled with murmuring strangers, their whispers crawling like insects along the walls. A clock ticked above the judge's bench, each second striking my nerves like a nail. I sat between Mr. Harris and the stack of files we had built together. My hands rested on the folder, knuckles white. On the far side of the room, Emily dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her face painted with grief that wasn't hers to claim. Daniel sat beside her, head bowed, his suit too large in the shoulders. He wouldn't look at me. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered, robe swaying, gavel in hand. When the gavel struck wood, the sound thundered through me. This is the battlefield now. Emily's lawyer, Michael Trent, stood first. Tall, polished, his voice smooth as cream. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about greed. It is about duty, duty within a family. My client, Mrs. Emily Carter, and her husband, Daniel Carter, relied on Helen Carter's repeated promises to provide financial support. They structured their lives around those promises. She herself insisted she would share her pension, her home, her stability. We are here only because she has suddenly broken faith." He gestured toward me with a subtle sweep of his hand, as though I were a wayward child instead of a woman who had survived 72 winters. My pulse thudded. Broken faith. The words landed like stones. Then Mr. Harris rose. His tie was still crooked, his voice steady but edged with steel. "Your Honor, this case is not about duty. It is about deception. Mrs. Helen Carter never promised to fund casinos, mortgages, or schemes. She worked for 40 years as a nurse, saving each dollar for her survival. And when she refused further exploitation, her daughter-in-law fabricated documents to seize what was never hers." He held up the copy of the forged authorization. "The evidence will show not generosity broken, but trust betrayed." Trent called Emily to the stand. She walked slowly, her shoulders trembling, the performance already begun. She sat, placed a tissue delicately on her lap, and raised her hand for the oath. "Mrs. Carter," Trent asked, "why did Helen give you money?" Emily sniffled. "Because she loved us. She said it herself. She wanted to help Daniel succeed, to give her grandchildren a better life. She told me, many times, that money meant nothing compared to family." Her eyes glistened, carefully angled toward the jury. And when she gave you those funds, Trent pressed, did she ever say they were loans? No, Emily whispered. She said, it's yours. Use it however you need. She wanted me to feel safe. Trent nodded solemnly, then turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, she gave freely. And now she wants to take it back. I gripped the folder tighter. My nails dug crescents into my palms. Mr. Harris rose slowly. He approached the witness stand, each step deliberate. Mrs. Carter, he said, you claim my client said, it's yours. Use it however you need. Can you recall the exact date? Emily blinked. It was spring maybe. May? Harris flipped open a binder. On May 14, at 7002 p.m., Helen Carter was logged into the St. Mary's Hospital electronic charting system, recording patient vitals. Do you believe she made this promise from a hospital ward computer? Emily's lips parted. Well, she might have said it earlier. And on June 1, at 10:11 a.m., when you claim she repeated it, she was at her clinic receiving a scheduled arthritis injection. We have the appointment card and medical records. Would you like the jury to see them? Her eyes darted to Trent. He raised his hand. Objection, argumentative. The judge overruled. Harris laid the appointment card on the evidence table. Mrs. Carter, are you sure about your dates? Emily's silence said everything. First came the professional. Dr. Alvarez, my longtime physician, stood tall at the witness stand. Helen Carter is 72, he said, voice calm, clinical. Her memory is intact. Her cognition is excellent. She manages her own medications and medical appointments independently. There is no clinical evidence of dementia, confusion, or impaired judgment. Second came the practical. Mr. O'Leary, the locksmith who had changed my locks after Emily's last intrusion. I saw Mrs. Carter with my own eyes, he said. She was clear. She said, change them. I don't want her having a key. That's not confusion. That's decision. Then came the social. Mrs. Robinson shuffled to the stand with her cane. I've known Helen for 20 years, she said, voice trembling but strong. I've sat with her while she wrote checks, balanced accounts, and kept her notebook. She always knew exactly what she was doing. And when she stopped giving them money, she told me, this time, I am saying no. Her words hung in the room like a church bell. But nothing pierced me deeper than when Daniel took the stand. My son, my boy. He spoke quietly, eyes fixed on the floor. Mom did help us, she said she would. Maybe she doesn't remember. But she did, Trent asked. And when she stopped? Daniel swallowed hard. It felt cruel, like she turned her back on us. His words sliced me open. I wanted to scream. I raised you, Daniel. I bled for you. How dare you call me cruel? But I stayed silent, nails biting into my palm until they left little moons. Mr. Harris only asked one question. Daniel, did your mother ever, in all your life, take a dime from you? Daniel's silence answered for him. When my name was called, I stood on shaking legs. I walked to the witness stand, each step heavy with years of sacrifice. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat. Trent came first, his voice smooth. Mrs. Carter, isn't it true that you gave willingly, that you wanted to help? I met his gaze. I helped because I loved them. But love is not a blank check. He sneered slightly. You regret it now, but at the time, you agreed. I leaned forward, my voice cutting clear. I spent 40 years caring for patients. I know what true consent looks like. True consent is informed, clear, and free of pressure. I never consented to see my pension drained into slot machines. Never. The room stilled. Mr. Harris stepped closer. Mrs. Carter, do you wish to make a statement to the court? I gripped the edges of the stand and rose to my feet. My voice did not tremble. Yes, I am 72. I am old. But I am not powerless. I am frail in body, but not in memory. I worked through nights most people never saw, cleaning wounds, holding dying hands, saving strangers while my own bones ached. I gave to my son and his wife because I believed family meant safety. But family is not built on theft. I have the right to keep what little I earned. I have the right to protect my future. And I will not apologize for choosing survival over silence. I turned to the jury, my voice firm as stone. I did not agree to become their wallet. I agreed only to live my last years with dignity. That is my consent. That is my truth. The judge's gavel struck once. Enough. He shuffled his notes, then looked over his glasses. His voice was crisp, final. This court finds the evidence of forgery credible. The authorization is invalid. Claims of oral promises are unsupported. The complaint is dismissed. Costs to be borne by the plaintiff. He raised the gavel. Motion denied. Case closed. The gavel slammed. The sound cracked through the room like a blade severing chains. Emily gasped, her handkerchief slipping to the floor. Daniel's shoulders sagged, but he still would not look at me. Around me, papers rustled, benches creaked, voices rose in murmurs. But all I heard was the echo of that gavel. Denied. Dismissed. Free. I sank back into my chair. My hands shook, but not from fear. From release. For the first time in years, the weight slid off my shoulders. My chest felt light, as though I could breathe without apology. Through the tall windows, late sunlight spilled into the courtroom, brushing the wood in gold. I lifted my face to it, and for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. The front door clicked shut behind me with a sound too soft for such a monumental day. I dropped my keys onto the kitchen table. They landed with a dull clink, the same as always. Yet tonight the sound echoed like punctuation at the end of a long, brutal sentence. The house was silent. No murmurs of strangers, no gavel pounding, no lawyer's voice filling the air with rehearsed arguments. Just silence, thick and plain. I set down my bag, hung my coat on its usual hook, and stood still in the middle of the kitchen. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, its second hand slicing the air with a rhythm that seemed suddenly louder than ever. I had won. The judge's words still rang in my ears. Complaint dismissed. Case closed. And yet, as I stood in my quiet house, victory felt strangely hollow. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on my back, the sheets cool against my skin, and stared into the dark. Each time I closed my eyes, the courtroom replayed behind my eyelids. Emily's trembling performance, Daniel's downcast eyes, the slam of the gavel. Faces floated through the darkness. Neighbors who had whispered, witnesses who had lied, friends who had stood by me, strangers who had stared. The jury's impassive expressions haunted me most of all. I whispered to the ceiling, I won. But why does it still feel like I lost something? The clock ticked on. I rose at midnight and wandered through the house barefoot, the floorboards creaking under my weight. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on and waited. The hiss of steam filled the silence, a small comfort. I poured tea into my favorite chipped mug, the one George used to tease me for keeping. The warmth seeped into my palms, but inside I remained cold. Sitting at the table, I let my eyes rest on the folder of documents still stacked neatly by the window. They were no longer needed. The forged papers, the statements, the notes scrawled in shaky ink, they had done their job. And yet I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. It struck me then. Winning in court did not erase the cracks. It did not erase the betrayal. It only confirmed what I already knew, that I had been right to fight. Around 2 in the morning, I stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet grass. I wrapped George's old cardigan around my shoulders and leaned against the porch rail. The street was empty, every window dark. I thought of Daniel, my son. Still my son, even now. He hadn't looked at me when the verdict was read. He hadn't stayed behind. Somewhere, he was lying awake too. Perhaps angry, perhaps ashamed, perhaps both. A heaviness pressed against my chest. I had defended myself, yes, but in doing so, I had lost what little bridge remained between us. I whispered into the quiet night. Was this the price of freedom? To stand tall, but stand alone? No answer came, except the rustle of leaves in the dark. Back inside, I picked up the brown leather wallet from the table. Its edges were worn, its surface cracked, but it still carried George's memory. I opened it out of habit, though it was nearly empty now, and ran my fingers across the inside seam. For years, this wallet had been a weapon used against me, a source others felt entitled to plunder. Now it was just leather and thread, a relic of the man who had once kept me safe. I closed it gently and set it back down. For the first time in a long time, it no longer felt like a cage. Dawn crept in slowly, the first rays of light slipping through the curtains. I hadn't slept a moment, but as the room brightened, so did something inside me. I brewed another cup of tea, this time not out of habit, but out of choice. I opened the window wide and let the fresh air pour in. Birds chattered somewhere in the distance. The house smelled of cool morning and bergamot. I sat down and whispered to myself, "It's over. The chains are gone. Not all of them, perhaps. The scars would remain. The silence from Daniel would hurt for years. The whispers from neighbors might never fully fade. But still, something had shifted. For the first time, I felt the possibility of living on my own terms. Later that morning, Mrs. Spiria Robinson knocked, carrying a loaf of warm bread. She didn't say, "Congratulations," or "I knew you'd win." She just placed the bread on the table, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat with me. We didn't talk about the trial. We talked about her roses, about the weather turning, about the way autumn light always seemed softer. For that hour, I felt human again. Not a plaintiff, not a defendant, just Helen. When she left, she pressed my hand. "You did what you had to. Now do what you want." Her words stayed with me long after the door closed. That night, when I finally lay back in bed, sleep still refused me, but my thoughts were calmer. I had walked into the courtroom bound by fear and shame. I had walked out with something different, not joy, not relief, but something steadier. A key, invisible but real. It would not unlock Daniel's love. It would not restore Emily's honesty. It would not erase the years of sacrifice lost. But it unlocked a door I had kept bolted inside myself. The door to my own freedom. The boxes were lighter than I expected. Not because they held less, but because they held only what mattered. I left behind the house where my trust had been broken, the heavy furniture that once trapped me, the curtains that had listened to too many tears. I sold it all, signed the papers, and walked out with nothing more than a few keepsakes and the brown leather wallet that had survived both love and betrayal. This time, the wallet wasn't an anchor. It was simply a memory of George, of endurance, of everything I had already survived. Now I live in a small apartment near the sea. White walls, open windows, sunlight pouring in without asking permission. The sound of waves greets me every morning, steady and forgiving. This morning, I padded barefoot across the wooden floor and lifted a cup of coffee to my lips. It was light in my hand, delicate. Not the way my phone had once felt. So heavy with dread, each vibration a reminder of what was being stolen. The cup was warm, fragrant, steady. I held it and smiled. I walked out to the balcony, where a wooden chair waited. I sat, watching the gulls slice the sky, their wings free and unapologetic. For the first time in years, I realized my shoulders weren't hunched. My body no longer curled in on itself like a secret. I often think of the contrast. Once, I woke every morning to the shrill ring of a phone announcing new losses, new demands, new disappointments. Now, I wake to the quiet crash of the tide. waves that take nothing from me except the silence of the night. Once, I sat in a living room darkened by suspicion and fear. Papers spread across the table like weapons in a war I never wanted. Now, my table holds flowers in a chipped vase, bright tulips nodding their heads as if to say, "It's over." T01. On. Once, I gripped the leather wallet until my palms ached, each time pulling out money that cut away pieces of myself. Now, I keep it in a drawer, empty but whole. A reminder that survival is not about what you give away, but about what you choose to keep. Some afternoons, I volunteer at a local center for children. I read with them, tracing letters on the page, their fingers small and eager. I show them how words can build worlds no one can take away. Their laughter fills the room, and sometimes I laugh too loud and unguarded. The first time a little girl handed me a crayon drawing of us together, stick figures holding books beneath a yellow sun, I nearly wept. But not from grief. From something else, something I had almost forgotten. Joy. Linda still calls me every week, her voice crackling over the line, reminding me to drink more water and never to doubt myself again. Mrs. Robinson writes postcards even though she lives only a mile away, each one decorated with roses she sketches in her careful, wrinkled hand. My circle is small, but it is solid. I think often of Daniel. His absence still aches. His silence is its own verdict. But I do not chase him anymore. Love is not love if it requires the erasure of oneself. For a long time, I believed my worth was measured in how much I gave. Now I know better. Worth is measured in how firmly you protect your own boundaries, how gently you protect your own heart. Sometimes, late at night, I whisper to the ocean, "I forgive you, Daniel, but I do not return to you." There is a peace that comes with reclaiming ordinary things. The kettle hissing in the morning no longer signals dread but anticipation. The sound of the mailbox no longer means threats, but postcards from friends. The mirror no longer reflects a woman shrinking, but one who can meet her own gaze without flinching. The scars remain, yes, but scars are proof that healing happened. I sit on my balcony most evenings, the same wooden chair cradling me, the same sky widening above. The sea is never still, always shifting, always restless, yet it soothes me. It reminds me that freedom isn't about permanence. It's about movement, about choosing when to stand, when to rest, when to let go. I raise my coffee cup to the horizon, as if to toast the life I almost lost and the one I finally claimed. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. My name is Helen Carter, 72 years old, a woman who almost lost everything because I trusted too blindly in the bonds of family. If you are still reading, it means you walked beside me through betrayal, through the courtroom, through nights when I thought fear would swallow me whole. And for that, I am grateful. You listened when my own son would not. You bore witness when my own daughter-in-law tried to erase me with a pen. I want to ask you only one question, and I hope you carry it with you. If one day, the person you trusted most forged your signature to steal your future, would you remain silent, or would you stand up? It sounds like a hypothetical, but for me, it was not. For me, it was a knock on the door, an envelope stamped by a court, a name written in false ink. It was the chill of betrayal and the fire of survival all at once. So I ask you, not as a victim, but as a survivor, what would you choose? Silence or dignity? If my story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your own battles, or of someone you love who is too afraid to say, no, please don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, share this story, tell me what you would have done, or what you did when life forced you to draw a boundary. Somewhere out there, another woman sits alone at her kitchen table, staring at a demand that doesn't feel fair. She is trembling. She is questioning. She is wondering if she has the right to fight. Your voice might be the one that gives her courage. Every week, I tell one of these true journeys. Stories of loss, but also of the stubborn spark that refuses to die. Stories of people like me, people like you. People who were taken for granted, and who finally decided enough was enough. If you want to walk those roads with me, follow along. Share them with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible. That freedom is worth the cost. And now, as I set down my pen, I want to leave you with one final thought. I am no longer the shadow trailing behind someone else's desires. I am no longer defined by what others take from me. I am the one who guards the door to my own freedom.